All right. So we've got to move along, and we've got a nice poem that's pre-recorded, and we're going to share it with everyone because Neil Shepard can't join us today. So Eric, would you like to just introduce Neil Shepard to the world?
Yeah, sure. Neil has such wonderful accomplishments. Let me just read some of them for you.
Yeah.
His eighth book, How It Is, Selected Poems, was published in 2018 by Salmon Poetry in Ireland. His sixth and seventh books of poetry were published in 2015. Hominid Up, also published by Salmon Poetry, and a full collection of poems and photographs. Vermont Exit Ramps 2 was published by Green Writers Press. His poems appear in several hundred literary magazines, among them the Harvard Review, New England Review, Paris Review, Southern Review, and Sewanee Review, as well as online in Poetry Daily, Verse Daily, and Poem a Day. Shepard has been a fellow at the MacDowell Colony, Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and the Tyrone Guthrie Center in Ireland, and he has been a visiting writer at the Chautauqua Writers Institute, the Frost Place, and Ossabaw Island Writers Retreat. He founded and directed for 8 years the writing program at the Vermont Studio Center, and I've been there. He also founded the literary magazine Green Mountains Review and was the senior editor for a quarter century. He's got other accomplishments, but yeah, we'll end there. Des, you can play his video.
Yes, yes. So here's Neil Shepard for everybody.
Hello, I'm Neil Shepard, and I'm going to read 2 poems about emotional healing, in this case, about the pain of divorce. The first poem, Easter at Whedon's, records a moment in time before the actual divorce, but well along in the messy process of separation. And the second poem, Midwinter Thaw, Vermont, A Visit from My Wife, records the first visit post-divorce from my former spouse. Easter at Whedon's, for Tony and Suzanne Whedon. Digging for Jerusalem artichoke and horseradish root in a sunlit patch where spring snows have melted clear. The earth soft for the taking, I dig down here because the pain has not stopped, has buried me in a drifting white uncertainty, a swirl that rages and does not die, until I cannot live another minute with Malay's laughing girls, half veiled in the shadows of my home, giggling into courtyards full of light to whatever suitors wave beyond the frame. Cannot live with the wandering Jew tangled in a brown mat of neglect, the jade jaded with a surfeit of sun, and the home and family I had dreamed with her gone. I come to Whedon's house because they will not have me Easter alone. Hours ago, we soaked salt from the ham, scalloped potatoes, baked bread we will break together in another hour, and then off to dig these offerings, roots and tubers fresh from winter. We walked their 20 acres, rehearsing this season of plenty, mark the hummocks and brooks rising, the moss rising and the bog rising, tadpoles and water beetles swelling, the white larvae too numerous to count, swelling like stars in a dark pool. I eat the root in my hand until the water of my eyes is confused and pain has suddenly a taste. I gnaw at tubers, dirt and all, their buttery, nutty flavor that heals the tongue of its wounds, the flavor of having lasted all winter beneath the earth, under the good graces of the snows, under death's small matter of leaves and grasses, and still whole at the next turning of the earth. I cradle these roots in my hands, note the blood from digging, blood under my nails, in the creases of my marrying lines, along the knuckles scraped raw. To the berry bushes returning with their red scars and bulges, we do a sun-old dance. We test the winter surviving timbers that will rise in a new woodshed, spin the water wheel that with snowmelt will generate its 1 watt of light, and we rehearse the divorce to come, how I will swallow whatever grief has ham as its first salt wash course, and bitter herbs, and bread broken from the whole loaf with friends. Night in their cabin, we listen to the waters curling around the foundation, small waterfalls stumbling among the stones, saccharing bells of sound to wash pain smooth as silt. Evening rumbles from the west, thunderheads warring a path across the sloping dell, until we imagine by the fire-lit last course of dinner how our cabin is an ark with its kerosene lanterns swinging port and starboard, its pairs of dogs and cats, its couple of proprietors, and their one guest casting for an olive branch as we float down the swale to Route 118, clear to the heart of Montgomery Center. And this next poem is Midwinter Thaw, Vermont, a visit from my wife. Since she is coming, and she will be cold, even on a winter day when it soars to 40, I go down to the woodpile and pull up a few bottom logs. With thaw, they've come unstuck, uncased from the ice. There's unexpected green beneath them, a stunned green stuck to the bark's puzzling design. When she comes, the sun will start again toward a dipping hour, our love continue its descent into bittersweet friendship. We might even lie together in the sleep of the long settled, might feed off the fat of some sweetness we tasted together in the past. Before an avalanche drops from a bough, icicles melt clear to extinction, and whatever new green is coming, comes. Thank you.
All right, so that's from dear Neil, who is hiking in the Alps right now, which is why he can't join us. And he just sent this in like last night. So great love to dear Neil. All right, so let's hear now from the lovely Topaz Winters. Eric, you're gonna introduce Topaz to everybody.
Yes, I am. And I'm reading an updated bio of Topaz, who's a Wunderkind. She's young, but she's accomplished so much. She's the author of 3 full-length poetry collections, most recently, Stranger Button Poetry, spring 2022. She's the founder and editor-in-chief of the internationally acclaimed publishing house, literary journal, and arts organization, Half Mystic. Her peer-reviewed research on poetry, identity, and queerness in Singapore is published in the Journal of Homosexuality. Her creative work has been published in and featured by Diode, Tinderbox Poetry Journal, The Straits Times, Entropy, the Boston Poetry Slam, the Singapore Writers Festival, and the Academy of American Poets, among others. Topaz is mature at 21 years old and in her second year at Princeton University. She writes love letters to a worldwide audience of thousands at topazwinters.com. So Topaz, the spotlight is on you.
Thank you, Eric. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from my second full-length collection, which is called Portrait of My Body as a Crime I'm Still Committing, which is very much a book about illness and a book about how illness lives in the body, and a book about how the body responds to illness. So yeah, here's the first one, which is published in the anthology. It's called The Night You Were Diagnosed. You name every rifle in your father's hunting cabinet another synonym for escape. This crevice, a rite of passage, your hands trembling in unknowns, exquisitely foreign and freezing in the dark. Somewhere in a city drowning in dusk, your mother tries to shape your sorrow into something she can blame herself for. By the side of the road, a dead man promises his children that tomorrow he will wake from hibernation. The precise moment it comes, you are infinity with increased knuckles, wishbone from a body that is not yours or one that was once, until you traded it for the memory of incandescence. Listen, Every deer in this forest is learning the sound of anguish. Listen, the moon rises so loud, the sky turns black in fear. In some other version of this night, your body knows all the places it has not yet been. Perhaps one day you will relearn the art of inhaling, but today is not that day. Instead, there is only your father's cabinet, somehow swinging open. Mouth glinting, soulless, teeth as so many rifles, swimming helpless and hungry in their trapped jawbone. So that's one of the first poems that I wrote for this book. I'm also going to read one of the final poems that I wrote for this book, which was like one of the poems I think that I wrote and knew that the book was close to done. And that was a really special feeling because I worked on this book for many, many years and it was really difficult for me to write. So this one was not published in the anthology, but it's called July. And bless that feast of hope and twisted organs. Bless the look on my dog's face when dreaming. Bless the singing swell of milk and coffee in the summer. I was so sure dying was easier than cleaning up the horrendous mess I'd made in yesterday's yellow light. And bless my bottomless sadness. Bless the flames I've put out. Bless the alcohol I vomited, the incense I've burned, and bless kneecaps and grapefruit and the chess games I always lose at. Bless the wreckage of the summer I kissed a girl on the grass and told her about the things I never thought I would survive. And bless my family doctor's hands that same summer, the coldest truths I'd felt for months, his stethoscope pressed to my chest, and bless the moment he let me listen to my own heartbeat, like a prayer or a promise. You are here. You are here. You are here. And bless the day the meds finally started working, but also bless every day before that. Bless every poem about healing. Bless every false start that made it possible for me to write poems about healing. And bless every single person who has ever asked if I'm okay. Bless every single person who has loved me loud as sage smells when crushed, loud as cicadas yearn at twilight, loud as death feels far on the first morning of summer, and you taste possibility in the rain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Topaz. Topaz, why don't you share with us a bit about your experience grappling with yourself, you know, your personal history, and also how you craft it into such fabulous writing.
Sure. So I am originally from Singapore, and I was very much raised kind of in a family that, in a very kind of traditionally Asian family. So I think my parents and sort of the people that I was surrounded by didn't always believe in kind of the stuff that I was dealing with in terms of depression and anxiety, and kind of eating disorders, and just like the way that I was, I think the issues that I was struggling with were like very internal, and that was hard to see on the outside. And so I very much, I think, turned to art as a way to process and as a way to cope. And that's always been an important part of my healing process, is creating work that sometimes feels like it can hold more than the people in my life can. Which is, I should also add that my family and my loved ones and the people who I am surrounded by have been so wonderful and so supportive, and really like love me in the best way that they know how, and that's the only way I can ask to be loved. But also I think like putting that work and putting that experience into poetry is also a very important way that I am loved and that I can love the world. And so that's been a necessary healing process for me.
Thank you so much. And what is it like to put yourself so vulnerably out there as a writer in your lyric, and as well as when you read your poems, you know, it takes a lot of courage to be able to go back into that material and then orate it, right? Every time it's almost reliving certain moments, right? Can you tell us what it's like?
I think it can be hard, but I also think that nothing good ever was easy. And so, like, I think about, you know, when I was younger, and when I was just feeling very alone and kind of what I was going through, it would have meant a lot to me to have someone who was open about the ugly and beautiful parts of illness and being diagnosed, and kind of going through the process of trying to find a new life and a path forward. And so if my work can serve as a soft place to land for someone who is in a position that I once was, that's really all I want. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for.
Nice.
If I could just cut in, like Topaz, it must have been very hard to write about all these experiences of yours. Did you take time to actually put down these experiences in paper?
I think so. I both my first and second poetry collections are really kind of grapple with the idea of illness in very different ways. I think they represent like two different points in my journey with illness. My first full-length collection was released with Math Paper Press in 2017, and it really is a story about the beginning and like how I think it's a much rawer collection because everything felt so new and everything had changed kind of in a very, very short span of time. And I think I wrote those poems as a way to make sense of that rapid change in such a short stretch, versus this collection took a lot longer. I think because it is about a much later point in my journey with illness. And so the poems in Portrait represent something that it took me a lot longer, I think, to come to the emotional state to write a book like this. And the poems exist kind of as not necessarily a stopping point, but as a point where I feel a lot more stable, I think, in where I'm at with illness and kind of my own treatment and kind of where I've arrived. And I think Portrait is still a deeply raw collection and still holds a lot of vulnerability. But because it took much more time to get there, I think the layers are a little bit more steady and a little bit more stable.
What is it like? What is it like looking back at that collection and reading it after years have gone by? You know, are there certain things that you feel could have been different? Do you like the way it held its space during that time? And how are you now? How are you now? I think that's a very important question. We don't ask writers. We're always about the craft, but how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I think it's like always a journey. I also don't want to ever put forth the idea that like I am now healed and everything is better, because that is, I think, a deeply unrealistic view of the way that kind of mental illness and the way that you know, medication and the way that we kind of live in the world today. I think often people can think like, oh, I was depressed for like a year and then everything was better when I got on medication. And I think like a lot of my illnesses, which are both physical and mental, are never gonna go away. And a lot of like my recent work has kind of been grappling with the idea of like, okay, how do I make space in the world for myself, both as someone with chronic illness, but also as someone who can exist apart from that identity. And that's been really important. And then I guess thinking about the way that my books take up space in the world, I think that they were the books I needed to write at the time. And for that reason, I would not change a word because, you know, I look back and I read it, and even if I'm not necessarily in the same mental space, I don't think I wrote them to be representative of who I am as a human being forever, because I don't think that's possible for me in my art. And so I'm grateful for what they gave me, and I'm particularly grateful for what they've given the readers and people who have like taken time to consume what I'm putting in the world, because I think that the moment that they were created, that is really a moment that they embody and a moment in which they are perfectly true. And they're, you know, I'm not in that moment anymore. And I think that that's okay. And I think that it doesn't have to be true forever for it to still be important and necessary and worthy of taking up space and time.
Thank you so much, Topaz. Oh my goodness, there's so many
Thank you, Topaz.
So many important takeaway lines, aphorisms, maxims coming from everyone. Y'all are just an amazing bunch of readers. We're so honored to have you. So, okay, just because for the sake of time, I've got to like move on to another poet, Jerrold Yam, who is a wonderful writer. Let me just introduce him to all of you. Jerrold Yam is a very good friend. It's a Singaporean lawyer, hotshot lawyer based in London. I knew him when he wasn't a lawyer. He is the author of 3 poetry collections: Intruder from Ethos Books, published in 2014, Scattered Vertebrae from Math Paper Press in 2013, and Chasing Curtained Suns, which was his first book, also from Math Paper Press in 2012. His work has been featured in Prairie Schooner, Wasafiri, Oxford Poetry, Washington Square Review, and the Straits Times. Jerrold, so nice to see you after so long. Take it away.
No, thanks so much, Desmond and Eric, for having me. I think, you know, being away for so long, it's my 10th year in London now. And I met, you know, Eric and Desmond, I think in 2011, 2012, on one of those Singapore Writers Festivals. And then on an annual basis, we would get together and we would collaborate. And I think, you know, I've missed that sense of community. And I also just want to flag that I think Desmond and Eric are doing a lot of great work in the Singapore literary scene with the anthologies that they've been putting out consistently over the past few years to add to that lexicon of what we deem to be Singaporean literature. I think, yeah, there's much to be lauded in terms of their efforts. So thanks so much for that and for allowing me to be part of this amazing community tonight. I think, yeah, what I've missed from these poetry festivals, even though we're taking it online now as opposed to in person, is the fact that I can, you know, meet all these, you know, a lot more experienced writers. There was so many, I think, points during this evening's session that I just thought, you know, I definitely need to bookmark that particular poem from this writer that I haven't heard of, but I should know. I think everyone in the world should know. So thanks so much for broadening, you know, my horizons when it comes to poetry. So I'm going to read 2 poems today, so 2 out of the 3 poems that I've contributed to this Atelier of Healing anthology entitled Scab and Pulse. For me, I think it's hard to extricate trauma from healing. And that's because I think in terms of, you know, the myopia that I'm writing about, you know, in no way about nature and war and migration and illness, like some of the poets this evening have spoken about. So it's a very myopic viewpoint of just my relationships with other people. I feel that healing isn't about going back or reverting back to the original position as if the trauma didn't happen. It's about inching towards a new sensibility, a new worldview, a new synthesis and equilibrium with that sort of trauma having taken place, kind of like, you know, a scab forming over a wound. So this first poem is entitled Scab. Peeling it off in half slumber, my fingers aroused by the scent of pliant tissue. Such are the ways the body destroys itself. Angiogenesis, fibroblasts, granulation, how grandma nurses her fear of sleep before waking to her surprise. Yep, and this poem is also in my third poetry collection, Intruder, by Ethos Books. And I wrote this poem just thinking about, I guess, my relationship with grandma and the fear of missing out, FOMO, about being based overseas, and yet thinking about, as with grandparents, naturally, it's only a matter of time. So that opportunity cost was weighing in on me when I was writing this poem. And I guess I was reminded by the fact that as much as the body deteriorates, it also astounds us in many respects with its resilience, kind of like, the actual physical healing process over a wound that a scab forms over. So yeah, that's Scab. The next poem that I'll read is a bit different. I'm not, I wouldn't call myself a political poet, but I think, so this poem was written in response to the Orlando nightclub shooting in 2016. Apparently, according to Wikipedia, which I just read before this session, it's regarded as the deadliest terrorist attack since September 2011. And it's the deadliest incident, I guess, in the history of violence against LGBT people in the US. So for me, writing this poem was a bit strange because, I was writing about an experience that didn't really happen to me, but it definitely caused some sort of, tremors in my experience and consciousness. So I guess that's a point to raise as well, the fact that trauma might not be directly inflicted, it might be inflicted on a community that's global. And writing poetry helps with that healing process. So this poem is entitled Pulse, named after the Pulse nightclub in which the terrorist act happened. And it's written from the perspective of the terrorist himself. This is the bed that makes you a family. This is the woman you have chosen, her chest softly tidal in sleep. This is your door, ajar, like parted lips, so as not to wake her or your son. Such are the hushed kindnesses of the family that makes its bed. This is the length of your street, houses crouching in the dark. This is your engine gnawing at the silence as if nourished by it. This is the melted sky, bruised color of streets, color of how the world continuously begins, cloaked and uncloaked by darkness. This is your car, left to crouch by the houses. This is you running, a hushed kindness blooming between your palms. These are your fingers working barrel and trigger, the street lamps on fire, singing gunmetal. This is the melted sky coloring over the pavement. As the world begins, these are the ones you have chosen, female or male, pigtailed or unkempt, genteel or voluptuous or mercenary or kind, school-going or employed, wisecrack or aphorism, this the color of parted lips, of families arriving to make their beds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerrold.
Thank you, Jerrold.
Jerrold, quickly, I'm going to jump in with a question before Eric jumps in. So you are right. You're more of a confessional writer rather than a political one. So when I read this poem, I was like, wow, this is amazing. But very interestingly, we've seen some persona poems from other people as well. Why did you choose the persona of the terrorist? What made you think you want to put yourself in the mind of the terrorist?
Yeah, honestly, that's not a red flag to the governments overseas, worldwide, to hunt me down, I promise. For me, it was a really instinctive choice. I think I was trying to, as much as I didn't want to, I wanted to understand the thought process as to how someone would even begin to think about committing such a brutal act. So I wanted to write a poem that I guess, humanizes the perpetrator without, absolving him of blame, of course, but to humanize the perpetrator as well as the victims, which is sort of the later few lines in the poem in relation to the victims, that we've, both got families that we love, people that would wait for us to come home at night, that would tuck us in bed. And I think for me, looking back now, it was part of the healing process to, I guess, humanize the perpetrator, to think that they're maybe not too different from us, but then obviously their choices and their decisions have led them to this, horrendous brutality. It definitely doesn't absolve them of blame, but I think it helps the community heal in some respects.
Thank you, Jerrold. Nice. So here's the thing. I've always been intrigued because we've got a couple of lawyer poets in Singapore. We've got Aaron Lee, you've got Amanda Chong, and you all do your advocacy.
There are several of them.
Yeah, several of them. And it's interesting, they are confessional poets, right? And I'm just interested in how you see your own advocacy in your profession, in your vocation as a lawyer of a certain training, and the way you view the world, and your own art, your own artistry as a poet, right? How does it all mesh? How does it all come together?
I think in many respects, now having practiced law for a few years, I think both poetry and law are pretty similar in a way that law is about the governance of human relationships. If not, we'll just be, sort of all hell breaking loose. It's a social contract, according to Hobbes, that we signed up to by virtue of birth into society. So, to avoid the Lord of the Flies scenario, we've signed up implicitly to this set of laws in society that would govern our relationships. And I guess in order to write poetry, and again, I'm no expert when it comes to poetry, so I don't mean this to be a universal truth, but for me, at least, the type of poetry that I write, I think it's important to understand my relationships with people and to launch, the sort of an excavation of the self almost. And we can't do that without understanding the sort of governance matrix that would, that sort of places these relationships into context in society. So in that sense, to understand poetry would be to understand human relationships, which is what the law provides as well. So I think in relation to, trauma and recovery, so I'm a corporate M&A lawyer myself, but I have many friends in litigation, and I think what they've told me and what I've observed in the market is that people use law as much as poetry, to grapple with trauma and recovery. Sometimes when it's a lost cause and it's clearly, it's not their fault, but someone else's, and then you sort of fight, a Pyrrhic victory in the courts of law just to make yourself feel better as a way of recovering from that trauma, that incident, or maybe you're just blaming yourself for committing, a particular act, and you just want to be self-righteous about it. So yeah, I think it's pretty interesting to see how, that overlap happens between the governing of relationships in law and the understanding of human relationships in poetry.
Wow.
That's great, Jerrold. Yes.
I just love it because I just have to say that I knew Jerrold when he was in the army at 18. Okay, so just hearing you talk like this is insane, Jerrold.
Oh no. Hopefully for the better.
Oh, you're brilliant. Eric, you want to jump in?
Yeah, and as a poet, you're fighting for justice as well in your own way. And you're reliving the broken experience of so many other people in your work, and bring them and maybe perhaps yourself to a state of catharsis. But I have another question. Recently, you've broken into Instagram. You've become an Insta poet with your Ambiguity account. What is this shift all about, Jerrold?
So I was told by multiple sources that my books are collecting dust on the shelves of bookstores, and to go where the readers are. So that was the exact quote. So I thought, yeah, that makes sense. Why not? If the younger generation, Gen Z, they don't use sort of paperback hard copies now, why not go where they are? And yeah, it seems like there is an audience there, so I'm pretty surprised. I must say, in terms of effort and perseverance, it's sort of up and down. So I haven't posted, I think, in about 2 weeks, but yeah, I think that's a good reminder. I might start tapping into that Gen Z energy soon.
All right, and will we be seeing some trauma Insta poems from you?
Yeah, so actually, that's a really prescient and good question, Eric, because since I started the Instagram account, which not too long ago, just a few months ago, I've just been reusing published work because I didn't want to give, sort of rights to unpublished work on Instagram. That might seem to be quite a waste, according to me at least. But interestingly enough, being on Instagram has made me write about social media, and I've got a slew of poems now just on social media and my relationship with it, and I guess using social media as a lens to negotiate the relationships that I have. So between parent and child, or between strangers, stripping away, I guess, the artifice of it all when people can't really see your true self. But also, I guess it's a necessary common ground in order to reach out and get that audience, and also to make new friends. It seems like that's sort of, well, especially during COVID times now, everyone's leading a virtual existence. So yeah, I've got some new work coming, and so also been writing about it. Got a few journals in sort of the pipeline, just publishing some of them. Ambit is in the UK is taking one of them in I think the summer this year, so in a couple of months' time. So I'm looking forward to just sending them out. But yeah, I think as with many other poets online today, I'm one of those poets again who sort of re-look back at drafts from like 2 centuries ago and just refine them, and I refuse to send it out until such time as I'm completely happy, which wouldn't happen, but maybe I should just put my foot down.
So we're all excited about these new works of yours, and on Instagram you are blazing a trail, and that should give us ideas here. So Des, you should post some poems there as well.
Oh no, I'm not even existent on Instagram. I'm an old dog. Okay, well,
Right.
Jerrold, thank you so much for
Thank you very
I'm just
much.
so happy to see you. All right. Thank you, Jerrold. We're going to just show you another video by someone else who couldn't join us in person. It's Noelle Q de Jesus. Eric, could you introduce Noelle for us?
Sure. I've known Noelle since we were in university. She was a junior of mine in the university, although she's older than me. And so she has written fiction and is the author of 2 short story collections, Blood Collected Stories, published by Ethos in 2015, for which a French translation by Patricia Uefa Grange was published this year by Edition d'O, and Cursed and Other Stories, published by Penguin Random House, Southeast Asia in 2019. The year of the pandemic brought work on her first novel to a halt, but it appears she has written some poetry. Noelle was born in New Haven, Connecticut, was raised in Manila, but has lived in Singapore for the last 2 decades and considers it home. And she's also on Instagram, posting plenty of pictures about her nature nature treks. She and her husband, Tani, who also writes, have raised a daughter and a son. Noelle works as a freelance editor and copywriter, and she has an MFA in fiction from Bowling Green State University.
All right. So here's
Yes.
Noelle for all of you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Noelle Q de Jesus. I'm a writer of fiction for the most part. I've only written poetry very intermittently and certainly not for publication, but I started to do more. The mystery, it's still a mystery, the craft and the process of it. And I'm learning as I go along, but it really was a joy to find out that that to have three poems I've written selected for this project, the Healing Atelier project of Desmond and Eric. So I'm very grateful. I will be reading two of the three that were accepted. The first is called Permission, and it's basically the experience that I have when I go visit the Philippines. Permission. Sip after sip, stories are uncorked this way from wine bottles. From there flow heady remembrances and sudden tears. Tastes bittersweet, pungent, awakening as stars rise and shine on dark nights and make visits home amazing, lifted by the multitude of tales, clarified finally, parsed, unpacked in intoxicating shots laced with gossip. Through lowered tones, secrets are drunk, telling of the ways things took place. What really happened falls fast from the tongues of women, kin and close, kindred and far. Why they fall so easily scattered, even while they struggle to steady you, focus the spirit. Hide your clapping ears. Make efforts not to show surprise. Keep eyebrows calm and exclamations unexpressed. Instead, wildly wishing for pen and paper, you squeeze tight the tail and commit it to flawed, faulty memory. And then later, much later, when eyes begin to fail, when tongues tire and faculties flag, that's the time to ask the question you waited to ask at first. Kept till last, kept till now, you say, may I, might I, can I write this please? Laughter crackles in the cool dark night air as they nod. Yes, yes, yes. Yet in the morning, forget what it is they gave, what they gave up and gave you. Precious, cherished secrets you hold tight, gripped hard in your hand. That is your heart. The second poem I would like to read is called Filipino Cotton Fruit, aka Santol. Filipino cotton fruit. Even when you say its name in English, Santol yields scant recognition, only puzzled looks. So we then describe to them this peculiar fruit, its strange tart taste, sour, subtly sweet, outer flesh that requires softening by 100 or more cuts from the sharp blade of a cutting knife. And then it is squeezed against rock salt and dipped in dark food vinegar to be enjoyed, consumed to the last threads of the fleshy, cottony seeds which we feed upon. Work them in the mouth for pinpoints of flavor, mild sweetness that we suck till nothing is left. Just gross, sad, tasteless, sucked up pits. And they say they don't get it. What on earth is the appeal of yearning for something that doesn't look like anything at all from the onset? What is the point of wanting so much from something destined never to give anything more than its own woolly cotton nothingness? And then they see what happens in our country. The leaders and politicians and their empty words, promises landing on the shallow surface of the hearts, hopeful, tireless, sad, forgetful people. And slowly they nod and blink and maybe begin to understand. That's all I have for today. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.
All right. Thanks for that, Des. And for those of you who haven't tasted Santol yet, it tastes a little like unripe mangoes. Not exactly like it, but a little like unripe mangoes.
All right. Yeah, it was so interesting to get what from Noelle, who doesn't really do poetry. So it was just interesting to see how a fictionist would approach the poetic line. It was lovely. Stuff. Okay, so we've got one more video by darling Lauren Camp, who says hi to everyone. Eric, could you introduce Lauren for us?
Yeah, Lauren has just been published by Kenyon Review. She announced it this week. And I'm very glad to read her bio for you. She's the author of 5 books, most recently Took House, published by Tupelo Press in 2020, which Publishers Weekly calls a stirring original collection. Honors include the Dorset Prize and finalist citations for the Arab American Book Award and the New Mexico Arizona Book Award. In 2018, she was a visiting poet for the Mayo Clinic. Her poems have been translated into Mandarin, Turkish, Spanish, and Arabic.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So here's Lauren.
It's a real pleasure to be here, to have the chance to have my poems included in what will be such an important anthology, to be part of this poetry festival. And I want to take this moment to thank the editors and the publisher for making sure this book will be out in the world and will get to exist. And these voices that are part of it will get to be there for people who need them. I am going to read 2 poems. I realize I write a lot about loss and grief, healing, recovery, and illness. I write not to solve it, not to change anything even, but maybe to settle something in me, maybe to allow those things to exist and also to hold little elements of them that I think are worth returning to, worth remembering. So the first poem is called Bed with Metal Arms. Her shirt held flowers. She said again, yes, when nothing was desirable. Alone in that bed, her legs without muscle kept wavering. Their exact flapping ripped at the air. Her hair was still thick, skin worth admiring. You have to keep these details close in your mind. It was one sunny day after another. The rest of us whispered at the sink, the laundry, the porch. The oxygen tank claimed her in call and response. When her voice went slack, I sat by the bed with its metal arms and promised what was ordinary, what would continue. Of course, there was final paperwork, one last signature, the time of pronouncement at the center of mourning. After the sinews and tendons released against harm, I sponged the body. I turned her over when no one else would enter. Perhaps then I understood what was withheld from us. We were still in her house. Some ate or chose a prayer for lunch. I could hear a beeping outside and a lawnmower. Nothing was wrong. The second poem I want to read is called Talking to Himself, and it's about a diagnosis that a friend got of a teratoma, which is a tumor typically in the groin area. And I realized that some of what the reason that I write some of this is to hold someone else's strength as a reminder for myself, as a lesson even of what can be done, the kind of grace and fortitude that someone can go through an illness with, a terminal diagnosis with even. And so for me, it's important to write always, but it's important to write these things down as sort of notes to myself or to you. The poem is called Talking to Himself. The specificity, to walk again, to stare the house, to leave the couch, not possible, to kneel, to stab the ground or bend, as if every inch no longer needs a door. You give the limb, a part that moved, a gift, or was it a betrayal? You give the hardest loneliness to give. Insist to give it. What will you understand of this world? Out the back door, hedges, all the light on boundaries. Again, you wake tilted with what's left to you, what is not. And you think only how it is not to think a leg, how we can walk with our minds. You're sure you can do this. You are not ruled by your elemental framework, bone and cartilage, femur bone. Remember the first day in winter, the wavering weather, the fourth debridement. The bees are audible at your neighbor's garden, the next trailer. They are hungry, drinking. You wait. You are drifting, patella, tibia, fibula. Remember tarsals. The future is a remedy that can also be an emptiness. Outside now, birds greet each other. Twittering birds run away each time you look. Thank you.
That's the lovely Lauren.
It's a real pleasure to
sorry.
be here.
That's Lauren Cam. And we are now going to have two more lovely poets read for us, and they've just joined us. Thank you so much. I know it's so early, Lydia, for you over there in Canada, but we're going to hear from Jendi first. So Eric, can you help us introduce Jendi, please?
Yes, Jendi or Yendi Reiter is the author of the novel Two Natures, published by Saddle Road Press in 2016, the short story collection, An Incomplete List of My Wishes, Sunshot Press 2018, and 4 poetry books and chapbooks, most recently Bullies in Love, published by Little Red Tree in 2015. They are the editor of winningwriters.com, an online resource site with contests and markets for creative writers. Yendi.
Hi there.
Yes.
I can't see myself on the screen. Hold on a second.
Uh-huh.
Okay, there we go. Okay, here I am. Hey, everybody. I really like giving a poetry reading at 8 o'clock in the morning. I think all poetry readings should be at 8 o'clock in the morning. So hello from Massachusetts. And I am going to read the two of the poems that are in the anthology. And I just want to thank you for making this opportunity. And it's so wonderful to be part of this, to meet a new international poetry community. So thank you for having me. This first poem is from my first collection, A Talent for Sadness, which was published in 2003. And I'm moving it over to my screen so I can actually see it, but I cannot. Okay. Close. In these cold, cracked hours, after hours, dripping days away in the brown steam of the coffee shop, traced rings of bitterness on the counter left behind by the lifted cup are darker than the water that drained from my smashed glass into the sink, white and hard as a tooth, the night you tore each other's flesh, the flesh I came from. The sky was a bruised purple orange, like the thighs of a woman squeezed through other bodies, pushing herself onto the last train anywhere. It was cold then, too. Fog smothering the city spires, sharp as a needle sinking into flesh, inoculating the water-swollen clouds. Soup is thicker than water, charity in a chipped bowl. How the smell stains the memory of your hallways. The air grows closer, though the gas flames out and the pot empty, and the farmers of beans and peppers will sell no more this winter. For my own good, you extracted promises from one another, like wisdom teeth smashed inside the gums, drawn out in pieces. Where's that old blood now? Is it mine? What you wanted was my judgment, but I'm no hangman, no train conductor who closes the doors. Ice traces fault lines on the pavement, like a cracked eggshell still holding together. Melts and reforms under passing feet, a skin of ice puckered and rippled like scar tissue. Outside the winter was empty, and inside too close, thick with electric heat neither of you claimed to want, save for my sake, but kept it on and paid the bills. I craved the cold air, free, but not enough to stand out in the snow under the bright eyes of the stars. Even now I ask what we all do. Help me, leave me alone. What you want is my confession. There it is. By my window, I wait for your turning back. Invisible your paths through the lines of frost echoing the stripped trees. So easily blurred by the steam of current desire, evaporating coffee, a craving obscuring the view of your road as you stumbled into the burdened future to love unrefunded. Other changes, other moments wait. My door is thin, made of wood. Come in, I said, though only the wind pushed it open. And the next poem I'm going to read is a more recent one called Soul Contract. And this poem is not autobiographical like the first one. And it will be in my new collection, which is titled Made Man, that hopefully is forthcoming this year from Little Red Tree. Soul Contract. The universe is that guy's apartment. When it says you chose your parents, you hear, take off your bra. Awareness narrows like a birth canal to this barefoot moment. And someday on another couch, you'll recapitulate the decisions that wisdom and will, your astral progenitors, surely swear you made. Consent's presumed because you're here, soaking up gravity, binge drinking air. The universe doesn't require enthusiasm. When it says, you chose this struggle to help you grow, you're sure that's why wishes don't swallow you like car keys drop down a nighttime grating. Why you couldn't shrink and strangle your body's inhabitant. The universe says you'll meet again ones you tried to ghost, pass by whistling, bounce off with a smile. When you stumble back to your good locked place in why were you wearing those shoes, the universe is waiting for you to see it in the bathroom mirror where only your face should be. Thank you.
Thank
you very
so
much,
And I'm
Yendi.
so
And
glad.
yes.
Yeah, I'm so glad Yendi decided to read both poems. You were
Thank you.
thinking of
Thank you.
gracing us with one poem and to talk more about your process. But come
Thank
share
you.
with us how you approach poetry as a means of healing for yourself.
Thank you. And my name is actually pronounced Jendi, but I like Yendi. That's pretty cool. That's great. It's been pronounced many different ways in my life.
Okay.
That's a new one. I like that.
All right.
Maybe I'll do that. Yes, poetry has been like a spiritual practice for me throughout my life through many, many different permutations of spiritual belief. It's always been something I've been blessed to be able to return to as a kind of a through line and something that doesn't change, even though my style changes and my topics change. Just the way of processing things is available to me all the time. I felt it's a great gift, no matter what's going on. I might not be able to write all the time because sometimes I'm just too upset or too busy or too happy or bored or whatever it is. But knowing that it's always there for me to put those feelings into when I'm ready has been a real gift. And sometimes it's, as in the first poem, it's something that is actually happening to me that I want to make sense of and tell the truth about in a family where that is not always acceptable. And to be honest, to also get revenge, because that is one of the reasons I write. And the second poem, it's more about taking aim at certain spiritual bypass attitudes that people have towards trauma healing, that I feel like healing is a balance between acknowledging that what happened to you shouldn't have happened and trying to find the gift that you can bring out of that. And I feel sometimes that what happens is when you try to bring something positive out of a trauma or out of an oppressive situation, People who don't want to deal with the pain will act as if, well, it was all for the best, which is really not what I'm trying to say. So that's why in the second poem, I'm using a very common situation that happens to people of a date rape or somewhat non-consensual encounter to maybe show how insensitive and victim blaming it is to try and spiritualize it away.
Great. And Jendi, right? So I was wondering, what is it about winter that makes psychological wounds most acute during that season?
That's a really good question.
We can only imagine what winter is like. I've only been in the States during the autumn, and I found that very cold in New York and in Boston.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I wrote the first poem while I was living in New York, and I actually wrote it, I think, in the office of a law firm that I was interning in 1999. I am no longer practicing law. I was much more interested in writing poetry. But winter in New York is quite harsh and lacking the beauty of here in Western Massachusetts. There's not a lot of trees to hold the snow. It's just very brutal, and you're dragging yourself around the subway, and the claustrophobia of it. I think when I was living in an abusive family and having like that sense of being stuck in your home is more acute, I think, even though I really like winter better than summer. I think that's why the bleakness of it comes through in the poem. It's the claustrophobia of the family that I was in at the time.
And whenever you write about these experiences, Jendi, you're actually reliving them. Does it help somehow that you're able to write about these experiences?
Yeah, I think sometimes I write about them when I'm in them, as in the first poem, and it helps me, I guess, name what's happening and have a voice in a situation that I didn't have one in real life. Often my writing runs ahead of my life, that I especially in fiction, which is my main focus right now, I will write about something that I want to be or realize that I want to be because I'm writing about it. So it isn't always just looking back, but generally something comes up whether I wanted to or not, and then I write about it. It's not like I'm going to go back on purpose to something that's painful in order to have something to write about.
Right.
Okay.
And just one last question from me, Jendi. You've written novels and short story collections, and we are gonna hear from Lydia, who's also written novels. Can you tell us a bit about the sensibilities that you play around with, moving between poetry and fiction, crossing genres? Huh?
Sure. I was exclusively a poet until about 15 years ago, and I think I bring the kind of attention to sound and the line and the image. I write fiction rather slowly because I'm not just getting plot down. I'm really trying to create a texture on the page in the same level of detail that I do with a poem. What I really like about fiction is it's a broader canvas. It doesn't have to be as lyrical and interior and self-focused. I feel like it can take me out of myself more to deal with situations beyond my own experience. And I think what's interesting for me then, going back to poetry, at this soul contract I wrote maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that my poetry then can take on more characters and can be more like little stories, more narrative and more persona. So I found like I've really enjoyed writing more persona poems, even if they're about my feelings, now that I've had a lot of practice with fiction. So that's a very interesting thing to reflect on as I go back and forth. And I find also that my poems sometimes make it into the book, or that I use the poems to work out character studies for a book.
Thank you, Jendi.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you at last, Des, after all the years of corresponding winning writers, and to meet you too, Eric. So thank you for having me, and for everyone for reading.
In fact, in 2011, I was on Winning Writers. It helped me so much. That was before my very first book. So thank you so much.
We're still doing what we do. Happy to help everyone out with your great work. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jendi.
Yes, thank you. For our final writer for the night, we've got the wonderful Lydia Kwa. I'm going to introduce Lydia to everyone. Lydia Kwa has published 2 books of poetry, 4 novels, and 2 chapbooks. Her 4th novel, Oracle Bone, was published by Arsenal Pulp Press in 2017 as the first novel in the Chuan Qi trilogy series. I hope I got it right. A new version. Have I got it right, Hedy? And a new version of The Walking Boy was released in spring 2019, also by Arsenal Pulp Press. She is currently working on the 3rd novel in this trilogy. Lydia, wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining us. It's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Desmond. I don't see myself on the screen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you and see you.
Okay, good. So thank you, Desmond and Eric, for including my 2 excerpts from 2 long poems in Atelier of Healing. I'm very honored and really grateful to be part of the anthology. And I think that it's so wonderful and meaningful to have this kind of work released. So I'm going to read from the 2nd set of poetry sequences that's from Flight from Memory. And Flight from Memory is, and these are in the order of the long poem, or the poetry sequence, but there are some intervening stanzas that I didn't include in this selection. But basically, Flight of Memory was written maybe a year or so ago, following, first of all, my mother having passed away in October 2017 from liver cancer. And then in July 2018, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So between the time my mother passed away and I was diagnosed, I was trying to write a long poem that another excerpt is from in the anthology, Notes on Grieving. And then after that, I've been writing or working on Flight from Memory as a response to breast cancer following my mother's passing. So I'll read from Flight from Memory. You hadn't wondered until the crisis how cells harmonize or deconstruct or self-destruct. Tension between flight and constraint, held in her arms, held back. Could feel and couldn't, knew yet couldn't quite. Words shuttered into silence. Yet scars testify to malignant code, to survival, to dying while still alive. Fragments torn from the fabric, as if she was still dying continuously in your body. Her tight, pained voice clenches you. Sacral miasma of despair and hopelessness rises to the throat. Too sensitive, too intense, too angry, too fussy, too much. I refuse to be loyal to loyalty itself. I've decided to remain unsettled. Stop pretending. Peeling away the illusory in search of uncertainty. Thank you.
Lydia, are you going to read us the first one as well?
Are you suggesting I do? Okay.
Yes, I am. Insisting.
Okay. Thanks, Desmond. This is from the long poem Notes on Grieving, and it is a response, another long poem to my mother's illness and passing, and how I, some of the sense of how I dealt with the grief. And this is an excerpt in Atelier of Healing that's based on an acupuncture session. And the beginning is the name of the site of the needle in the palm in the hand, called Lao Gong, Palace of Toil. How hard my loyal sentinel has been working to shield that tender place, the heart which palpitates so, stuttering, agitated, scarred by the slightest signs of betrayal. The needle enters pericardium 8 on my left palm. The earth of knowing disappears, explodes in a rush of pain and tears. She keeps me company while I weep. I'm sorry to cause you pain, she says. She would have removed that needle had I found it intolerable. But I ask for the second in my right palm. These weapons of liberation shock the palace guard with relief from duty. Now I can be exhausted, enter a sleep of countless lifetimes, pinned down at the palms. Thank you.
Thank you. So beautiful. And what lovely poems to end on, right? Our whole reading. Eric, you've got a question for Lydia.
Yeah, so it must have been painful to write about your mother.
Yeah.
Or were you writing these poems during her illness? I mean, at least maybe one of them.
No, actually, I couldn't write.
Oh, not at that time.
Really, not at the time. And I struggled to start the long poem Notes on Grieving in January 2018, but it took me quite a while until more recently to collect all these fragments and to rework them and to write some new ones. So it took me a while to voice or to relate to some of the experiences, you know, and I chose to write in ways where I use space a lot, and there's a lot of breath or silence in the poems in different parts. Not so much in Lao Gong, I suppose, but it kind of alludes to that silence there. So it took me a while before I could really work on the long poem.
And how, yes,
sorry.
how meticulously did you work out these poems, knowing that you're working towards your homage for your mom?
I don't know how meticulously. Meticulous. I mean, you know, you see in the long poem
yes.
sequence, I'm too fussy, right? So yes, I am meticulous. So it was quite meticulous. I did my best. You know, a poem or a work of fiction that never feels finished, but that's okay. It's part of a process. Yeah, it's part of a conversation first with oneself and then with others. Yeah.
You know, Lydia, Jendi just shared with us that she started with one genre and then discovered another through her own writerly journey. What about you? What comes more naturally to you? Is it poetry or fiction?
I clearly know the answer, and it's poetry. I started out as a poet. I still think of myself at heart as a poet. I don't know how I migrated to fiction. In fact, I have a funny true story that I tricked myself into writing my first novel because I couldn't consciously say to myself that I was going to write the first novel. I started out with really short lines, like, you know, like in stanzas, and the novel is this place called Absence, and it's in 4 women's voices. So I started with these really short lines as if they were monologues, but poetic monologues. And then I said, oh, it feels like the lines should be longer. So then they got longer. Well, it's some kind of lyrical narrative. At 80 pages, then I said, oh, it's a novella. And then at 110 pages, I thought, oh my God, I'm writing a novel. This is a true story. So in looking back, I realized that I couldn't quite accept that I had enough in me to say. So that's a terrible bias against oneself as a novelist or writing longer works. And I still think that, poetry is a very demanding practice. Just because it's a shorter form doesn't mean it's less work. It just requires very different kind of mindsets. But I did drift into fiction, and then, 4 novels later. The first, the 2 books of the Chuanqi trilogy are now presented as a Chuanqi duology. And the 3rd book is now going to be presented as a companion novel. So there's a long story to that. It's not relevant here, but just to say that it takes a long time, right? It takes some endurance to write a novel, and it's a very different involvement. But I still find that whenever I go back to writing poetry, I just feel a certain sense of being at home in doing the work of poetry.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. All
You're
right.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lydia.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Our pleasure, our collective pleasure for everyone to be here and sharing this wonderful space, this important space. We've more than hit time, thank you so much, everybody. I wish we could talk forever because, I have so many questions I want to ask all of you. Maybe we've got to invite you back for another event. I don't know if you have time for us again. But Eric, anything to cap it all off?
Yes, of course. So we've heard plenty of wounds tonight, both psychological and physical. And like many of the poets featured tonight, maybe it's just a matter of being at home with them, being okay, however we are, as Topaz said earlier. Maybe that's the point of writing about trauma, right? We're not here to solve anything. It's just a matter of living with it, with whatever situation we are in. And we have a lot more events at the Poetry Festival, so please continue staying tuned to the program lists that we have on the Facebook page of Poetry Festival Singapore. And Desmond?
And all these
Back to you.
wonderful writers who are here with us. You can find them online. They're all very famous. They've got websites, they've got books. So please go out and search out their wonderful poetry and be blessed by their poetry as much as we have today. So everybody.
And, yes, do hit the bookstores and check out their works, and they've got new projects out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night,
you.
everyone.
Good night. Good morning.